show, Week 6, NFL, main slate, Draftkings, Fanduel, Yahoo. We're talking it all. And you guys know better than my co-host, my boy, Sal Vitri. Happy Saturday. What's going on, my man?
Happy Saturday, Chris. Yeah, we were just before stream starting to get going, starting to talk about this stuff a lot. Interesting week. We're getting news left and right, question tags on so many players. So this should be a very helpful stream to get into the weekend. And then, yeah, definitely just monitor the news throughout.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I thought we were already on the show. The way that we were kind of going into it, we were breaking down some of the news that has taken place in the last 24 hours that has kind of shifted a lot of things. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna break it down. But before we do, we want to thank our beautiful sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They're going ahead and always sponsoring this as usual. And you guys, if you're not playing on Yahoo yet, go ahead and check it out. They got the $1 Million Baller, 30K first place this week. Now, what's different about Yahoo is you can't upload CSV files yet. So you got to do all hand building. Kind of gives you an advantage. Kind of keeps a lot of the big players out of it because they don't have time to do that. They have time to work on other sites. But more importantly, if you use the code AWESEMO to sign up, you get $30 in Yahoo reward points. What that does, that gets you 3 entries into the $1 Million Baller. So if you haven't used Yahoo yet, go over there, check them out. You can click the links on awesemo.com. You can click the links in the NFL articles. Use the code AWESEMO. That's AWESEMO. And let us know how you guys do. All right, Sal. So, week 6, we're here. 10-game slate. So it's not necessarily a larger slate that we're usually accustomed to, but a lot of things have changed over the last 24 hours. And I think, the first thing we should really break down is Malcolm Brown. I mean, Todd Gurley's out. Malcolm Brown now is in the mix, 4,300 on DraftKings. I mean, this injury, that news that broke, I mean, this kind of shifted a lot of things. We've seen a lot of players change in ownership percentages because of Malcolm Brown. Go ahead and give us your insight on this, and where do you see yourself going with Malcolm Brown?
Yeah, so Malcolm Brown was sort of the first thing to fall. We're still waiting on so much stuff, but Todd Gurley doubtful, so Malcolm Brown seems to be the guy to get the majority of the snaps. I expect Brown to be taking all first and second down responsibilities and probably majority of third down, but they do have Darrell Henderson Jr. They drafted the kid for the exact reason of being sort of a third down change of pace to relieve Todd Gurley, what they thought was, at the time, the knee being a huge issue. Maybe it is right now, we just don't know. But yeah, Malcolm Brown probably gets majority of the snaps. And right now where I'm sitting with this is that I think it is definitely a good cash play. And we were talking before stream that it's a week that seems like there's thin running backs and even what seemed like a loaded mid-range slowly as you unravel the week, injuries and whatnot. The mid-range is also becoming a little bit thin. So he's just naturally getting ownership. He's, I believe, top 5 right now in our projections on Awesemo. So it's a spot that I like him in cash. I think he's a fine cash play. When you get to tournaments, though, you have to just ask yourself what lineup construction looks like for you. If you're going to be getting to him, I think it's fine at that ownership. That's probably somewhere where I come in, honestly. I don't really want to get over it, though. I know he's a cheap running back. I know there's upside there. He's going to have all the goal line responsibilities, but that's really what you're banking on here is goal line responsibilities. It's a tough matchup, and I was just looking quick. He has 19 catches on 178 routes run in his career over the last 4 or 5 years. So what that breaks down to is he's catching a ball pretty much every 9 or 10 routes run. So what you're looking at is a decent projection if you looked at it from that regard of 2 to 3 catches, but that's not factoring in Darrell Henderson Jr. likely to seeing some passing down work. So I think you could project him to see like 1.5 receptions here, which isn't great. So at the price point, though, I probably come in right around where ownership is right now. I really don't want to take a strong stance in terms of going over the fields on it. It just seems like a very touchdown dependent play at that price point. But we've seen last week, like James White, 13 fantasy points in the Millie Maker lineup. You don't need a ton, but when that happens, you're going to need players to go for 50 points, and that's likely not going to happen as often.
Last 2 years, 171 snaps. Malcolm Brown has played, 6 targets, 4 catches. Not a lot of experience the last couple of years. Definitely has been in some goal line purposes. He showed out one of the games earlier this year. I think it was the first game this year against Carolina, where they kind of switched it up. He got 11 rushing attempts. It was kind of interesting, but found himself in the end zone twice. That really kind of shifted our mindsets, for a couple of days as far as what is this game plan? Are they going to be running a dual threat? But since then, I mean, the amount of carries that he's had in the last 4 games is just a little bit over the amount of carries that he had in game 1. So we're going to break this down more when we get into this game. First, what we like to do is we like to go over some injuries, some key notes that could definitely affect the slate. And I think the next guy that's going to be very interesting that, to be honest with you, we might not know till right before lock of the slate, or it could happen in between. So this is going to be very interesting. But David Johnson, game time decision. We don't know. Edmonds could be the guy that steps up. Could be another cheap price point situation that people want to gravitate to. What's your take on this, Sal? And does this affect your roster construction, given the fact that we really don't have clarity on where David Johnson is going to be going yet with this status?
Yeah, it completely affects everything. This is more so impactful, in my opinion, than the Malcolm Brown news right now for how I would have played. Look, whether it's Chase Edmonds getting all the work or David Johnson getting all the work, either of those plays would have been a fantastic play this week in their matchup. People can say the Falcons are better against the pass catching running back, giving up the third fewest receptions, but they faced no pass catching running back so far this year, so it's a little bit skewed. But yeah, David Johnson, he doesn't practice 2 days in a row, gets a limited practice on Friday, and then they list him as likely to play. But the back injury, they said he's going to give it a shot and see in the warm-up, so it doesn't help us out trying to roster him. But if you looked, I was watching his interview on Friday after practice, and it wasn't good. It wasn't a good sentiment. He pretty much said, like, I'm going to be hoping to be out there. I expect to be out there, but like not with a full workload. So the best thing I can do here is just I rear back my interest in David Johnson in cash games, even in tournaments. And then Chase Edmonds, who we would have had a conversation around, do you just lock this guy in if David Johnson is out? His upside gets capped a little bit. I think you see closer to a split here, with the upside being more so closer to Chase Edmonds. It doesn't seem like this back injury is good. It seems like they've been downplaying it. And I think like the best you get out of David Johnson, based off of the news we have right now, and this can change come maybe tonight if Adam Schefter comes out with something like he does overnight. But based on the information we have right now, I can't really expect David Johnson to play more than a 50-55% snap load, and that's a little bit concerning. And really, it just ruins both plays, and it's like the worst possible outcome if that's what happens.
Just to kind of give a little bit of insight, Atlanta is not that bad against running backs. And to be quite honest with you, the amount of points that they surrender per game to running backs, they're top 5. They're only surrendering 18.2 fantasy points per game to running backs. Now, you might say, well, that's a lot. Well, I mean, if you look at the actual breakdown of the list, I would say about 70% of teams are giving up over 20 points. And when you look at it, the top about 15% are giving up 30 points or more. So, I like the passing game more in this. And I think a lot of people are gravitating because of the price. It's not necessarily the best matchup, especially if Edmonds is in. I don't trust that. So if you're looking to ask me, well, what kind of cheap running back would you go to in this situation? I think I would choose Malcolm Brown if I had to. But once again, we talked about it before the show. Based on where these wide receivers that we kind of like are priced, we kind of don't need to go cheap at running back this week. So, and we'll get into that because it's very interesting. Another guy that is kind of up in the air right now, he's questionable, but there has been some tweets that kind of throw me off. And sometimes these beat writers, man, that I feel like they don't even know what they're talking about. So I kind of go with my intuition and just stick with what I feel. But Alvin Kamara, he's questionable right now, at Jacksonville. This game shows a lot of opportunity of being somewhat of a shootout because of its high over-under. But Alvin Kamara, how do you feel about this questionable status? And could this be a situation where he doesn't play?
So I feel the most confident in Kamara. Yeah. So he tweaked his ankle a little bit in Friday. After the practice, he came out and just said that it wasn't that big of a deal, but he's officially listed as questionable. So it's a spot that we just wait on. Look, if for some reason he's out and Latavius Murray's in, I actually slightly prefer Latavius Murray in this matchup to Malcolm Brown, and Murray's also just like $3,700, so cheaper. So keep an eye on it. But as of right now, I would expect Kamara to play. And if Kamara is going to play and we don't get any further news, I would just play it as if he's going to be 100%. We didn't get any negative news in terms of it was a really bad ankle tweak. It seems that if anything, closer to more of a precautionary thing than being something really bad. But again, we got to wait on news there. But I think Kamara is the one who's the safest to actually suit up and have his normal responsibilities.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. However, though, in this situation, if he does so happen to sit, could we see Latavius Murray shoot up and see yourself having a lot of shares of him?
Yeah. I mean, I think he is, if I do remember, $3,700. So if that's the case, and we know what to expect out of Latavius Murray when he's sort of the workhorse running back, where we don't know what to expect out of Malcolm Brown, albeit a different offense for Murray, but he does have pass catching upside, all goal line upside. Yeah, at that price point of 3,700, if Murray is the featured back here with Washington behind him, it's going to be hard not to have a ton of Latavius Murray in any format.
Two other guys that I kind of want to talk about real quick, and one I feel is in a very great spot this week, especially with the defense that he's going to be facing, is Christian Kirk. Hurt his ankle not too long ago. still status up in the air. However, though, he draws an amazing matchup against a defense that struggles significantly against wide receiver twos. Christian Kirk, does this have any influence on you as far as could you see yourself going this way? Does this status kind of give you any fear? And also, if he does play, do you see any ownership coming off of Fitzgerald in any way, or do you kind of see that being stabilized?
Yeah, I think the ownership will probably stabilize, especially if this is indeed a game time decision. Maybe slightly comes off, but nothing to change any perspectives too much. I would prefer Kirk if he's going to suit up and play. And they said and we get news that he's not limited, which I would expect if he plays after having some weeks off now. I would prefer Kirk. I think he has the higher ceiling. It seems like Fitzgerald is just more active around the red zone. But if we're talking GPP, I prefer Kirk there. Probably fits in a cash format. But yeah, Kirk's going to get back if he does play and resume right away, running 40 routes out of the slot. The Cardinals had to change the way they played a little bit last week. They ran less 4 wide receiver sets, more 3 wide receiver sets to keep Farrell Cooper off the field. But now they'll get back to what they like in running primarily 4 wide receiver sets, or the most in the league at least. And you'll see Kirk in there with Fitz. So yeah, I would prefer Christian Kirk. I think his price point is just broken by probably at least $500. And he's averaging just the 6th most targets on the slate if he does resume playing.
Yeah, the high volume, not necessarily such a deep threat. His air yards are significantly low compared to a lot of the rest of the field when it comes to these wideouts, but a lot of opportunity and volume. And at that price point, you'll pay all day for targets and for shares. My last guy that I want to kind of talk about, he needs to get medically cleared. It seems like all signs are going to give him a go, but I feel like his status definitely kind of affects a lot of people. I've heard a lot of people talking about maybe going with Pringle and cash games on DK, and this is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, obviously had the issue week 1 against Jacksonville. We don't know necessarily if he's going to play. However, though, signs are pointing that way. If Hill does end up suiting up, right now he's projected, sub 5%. Do we see a significant spike in Hill? And does this also affect Kelsey, Watkins, or any of the other wideouts in regards to the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, so Tyreek Hill, I have a ton of interest in Tyreek Hill if he actually suits up. So game time decision, I think it keeps his ownership low. If we get news though, normally like an hour and a half before lock, it'll probably come up a little bit. But you're going to get a very discounted Tyreek Hill in both price at that price point, but also in ownership just naturally due to this tag on him. It seems like they're optimistic that he's going to play. Seems more like what can you do in warmups, and if you're good, you'll go. So yeah, I like Tyreek Hill at that price point in this game environment. I think it helps Travis Kelce, he's been playing fine. He's been great. It's just touchdowns for him haven't come, and he's had a lot of red zone opportunities, just some called back, just some near misses. So I think it helps him in the middle of the field. Sammy Watkins likely going to be doubtful. So I've had a question about what's the rest of the wide receivers look like. And I don't know. It's an interesting spot because Pringle and Hardman usually play about half of their snaps in the slot. Demarcus Robinson's primarily on the outside. If there's no Sammy Watkins, I imagine they continue to put Robinson on the outside, Tyreek on the outside, and then you'll see a split in the slot between Hardman and Pringle, and then some just extra snaps to spell maybe a Robinson when he's not on the field on the outside for Pringle. So I think it most impacts definitely Pringle and probably even the overall ceilings of everybody there. But yeah, if Hill's going to be active, I'm just going to active this as if he's 100% go, and I'm going to have him in a lot of lineups because look, if he's probably $1,000 too cheap if he was to play. So that's the risk you take. Is he fully healthy? And I'm just going to, my perspective is say yes if he suits up.
Yeah, if Hill suits up and Watkins suits up, to be honest with you, I feel more comfortable rostering Hill. I think when it comes to the hamstring or anything with the leg, I think it's easier to tweak something. I think it's something, it's a fragile situation. So Hill, his collarbone, if he's medically cleared, I feel like he's ready to go. But I agree with you. I think this does open up the passing game for Kelsey. I think it really affects the defensive game plan. And I think, having Hill either get into the slot or going deep is really going to open up the field over the middle for Kelsey. So I think Kelsey needs Hill, to be honest with you, to see more production out of Kelsey. Not saying that Kelsey hasn't produced this year. I'm just saying that I think that it would open up a lot more. I feel like the red zone has been shut down for Hill because there has been limitations in regards to targets with Watkins and Hill being out. It's kind of like, okay, well, we're going to focus on Kelsey. So I think that this will definitely open up and help him out.
Yeah, I agree.
As we go into our next thing, we talk about ownership, guys. And for all of you that don't know, Awesemo.com, they have their proprietary ownership projections that change significantly throughout the day as it leads up to game time on Sunday. And these ownership projections, what they do is they help us really gauge and understand where everyone, is thinking, what everyone is wanting to do. And so as we go over this, we're going to go over the top 5. Usually we break down people who are over 20%, and we talk about how we feel about this situation. But for those of you who don't have Osmo projections, you can go ahead and use the code NFL Strategy. You can get 50% off your first month to try it out. We're going to break it down for you right here, the first 5 people. But if you're looking to get the rest of the list and you don't have access to this, use the code NFL Strategy. Click on anywhere on Osmo.com. If you click on the Osmo.com NFL landing page, lots of videos on shows you how and what you get and kind of breaks down exactly what all these things that Osmo.com does. But once again, if you're looking to team up and pair with the number 1 player in the world himself, Osmo, Alex Baker, go ahead and use the code NFL Strategy. Check it out. Sal, Leonard Fournette, George Kittle, DeAndre Hopkins, Le'Veon Bell, Malcolm Brown. These are our top 5 for DraftKings. And for those for FanDuel, we're going to go ahead and break that down too. But let's go with Fournette first, Sal. 6,700. Right now, he's coming in currently. That was just updated. 28.8%. We talked about this before the show a little bit, how we're not as confident about this spot. Yes, it's a volume situation. And yes, the price point is dictating that. Let's break this down a little bit more. How do we feel about Fournette here?
Yeah, so look, this mid-range of running back for the most part, beginning of the week looked loaded. Now there's some just reasons for concern around injuries around players on their team, and those players specifically like Gurley. Fournette, he's at the top of this range, and yeah, due to his volume is too cheap. But if you look into it, his offensive line matchup this week against the defensive line for the Saints is the worst. It's the biggest mismatch on the slate there, so that's not great for his running ways. But yeah, we talk about volume. If he's going to see on average close to 23, 24 total touches, with an average passing game worth close to 7 fantasy points, it's good. But now you factor in that he's going to be close to 30% owned, and I start to get a little bit less, especially when another guy who's in this top ownership, and we're going to get to him soon at the same position, I like a lot more. We were talking before the show that I'm very much favoring getting to wide receivers in the flex this week, and I'm getting there more so than not. So I'll have Fournette lineups, 28, 30%. That's probably where I come in. I am primarily like a 3-max player, so that's just 1 out of every 3 lineups. That's probably where I come in on it. If you were somebody who is max entering, I would say that maybe I would be a little bit under that, closer to the 20% mark than 30, but it seems fine. Like there's just not that many options at running back that you can feel good about, and he's going to be one that has a ton of work. It's just the actual matchup is the issue. But again, volume trumps efficiency. But even with that said, I probably get a little bit less than where we're coming in right now.
64 yards per game that they surrender to the running back position. It's actually 5th best in the NFL. 20 attempts they usually surrender as well. So the average yards per carry, I mean, is sub 3.5 yards per carry, which is another top in the NFL. They've only given up 3 total touchdowns all year so far to the running back position. So they've been very stout. I mean, if there's an area of weakness for the Saints, it's that secondary. It's those slot cornerbacks that cover the slot, and we're going to get into that as we break down the game. However, though, once again, when we talk about talent and how it's superior to the overall defense, and defensive matchups don't matter, I think that this is not a Dalvin Cook situation where Philly's run defense is one of the best in the league, and Dalvin Cook is very talented. I feel as if that maybe Jacksonville's going to have to rely more on this passing game. And what I'm trying to say is I'm not saying that Fournette's a bad play. I'm just saying be cautious because 30% of the field right now is on him. And so, this is a situation where if they're also playing from behind, you're going to see more of the passing game. But I think the biggest thing is that I think they're going to need the passing game more than the running game in this matchup in order to get the win. And I think that vulnerability in that secondary is what we're going to see with DJ Shark and DD Westbrook as we get into that game breakdown later on. But that's kind of how I feel right now. I don't know if I'll necessarily be there with the field on Fournette. I feel like Fournette is more of a cash game play this week. GBP, you're not really differentiating yourself. You're not separating yourself from the field. You're just going to have the same lineup if you're going to have a bunch of shares of Fournette. So just be cognizant, be aware of that. And I mean, I guess that's kind of where I would go with that. The next guy on DraftKings is George Kittle, 5,200. Priced very cheap, in my opinion, at tight end on DraftKings. Going up against the Rams, 25.2%. I mean, is there anything that we could say about this? Is there anything we could warrant as far as, is this the right play? Do you feel like you can pivot somewhere else? Is Austin Hooper a better pivot since there's not much ownership there and he draws the better matchup? Go ahead and give us your take.
Yeah, so George Kittle, he pops up. So yeah, I think he's too cheap, and I think he's the best tight end play on the slate. The ownership matches it, but Friday he did pop up with a groin injury at practice. Now Shanahan downplayed it a little bit, said he'll be fine. Officially listed as questionable. As long as all of that's good and no further news comes out and he's going to play and not be limited at all, then yeah, I think he's the best play on the slate. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to 100% George Kittle. You touched on Austin Hooper. All of these tight ends, and there's a lot of them picking up close to 20+% ownership. So it comes down to, not are you leveraging the field that much, or are you just picking the guy who scores more points, because they're all priced similarly as well. So yeah, I like Kittle. Hooper, like you said, he's a fine pivot, but in the same price range, he projects out similarly. I have Kittle for more points right now, so I'll probably have the most Kittle. Hooper will be second, or pretty close to second, right behind him. It's just a matter of what you think of this groin injury, and I'm sure we'll have more news come Sunday. The way I'm seeing it right now, though, after what Shanahan said, is there's a little bit of a tweak, but it shouldn't limit him. So yeah, I think that ownership on Kittle for me is fine.
For me, I like Austin Hooper more. I think that it's a better spot for Hooper. I think a lot of people are kind of underestimating still Hooper as a player, but I mean, he's a target monster, and he's a safety net for Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan throws the ball. I mean, he just chucks it. So Matt Ryan, he's going to get you his 300 yards, and those 300 yards have to go to someone. And I feel like in this situation, they don't really have a running game. And, when you're looking at these wideouts not necessarily being open, or there's, a broken play, I mean, the ball goes to Hooper no matter what. But he's also getting a lot of red zone shares as well. So at 5,000 on DraftKings, I think it's very appealing. And to be honest with you, I think it's a great pivot from Kittle. Not to discredit Kittle, but if he does have a little bit of a groin injury and this is something that's bothering him, the last thing I want to do is put a lot of shares into someone who can go out the first quarter and get tweaked because of that type of injury. So, and I think San Francisco's in a tough matchup this week. Don't forget, this secondary is pretty decent of the Rams. They've had some matchups where they've looked vulnerable. However, though, I think that this matchup this week, I think it's getting underestimated. I think this front four is going to get to Garoppolo. San Francisco hasn't really played a really good team yet. I mean, to be quite honest with you, they've played some trash teams. And so this week, I don't necessarily like the matchup for Kittle and for these 49ers team. I'd rather pivot to a game that I think has a lot of upside, has a lot of potential. And, I think Austin Hooper's in a great spot. So not so much in on Kittle as maybe the rest of the field. DeAndre Hopkins, 7,400, going against KC, 25.1% on DraftKings. Now, the narrative lately, Sal, has been high-priced wideouts haven't been paying off. Is this another situation where, maybe it's best to take a step back and look elsewhere? Or is this the week where we can say, you know what, we can pay up for someone like Hopkins? And maybe that's what people are thinking with maybe, let's say, the Malcolm Brown owners or maybe the Chase Edmonds owners. Is DeAndre Hopkins that type of play this week for us in DFS?
Yeah, I think Hopkins is a really good play at the top end this week. And I think he's underpriced. So what you saw last week was just pretty much Hopkins in that fourth quarter and towards the end of the third quarter starting to catch more balls and produce, because they started to take double teams off of him because Will Fuller was just going absolutely nuclear. So I think defensive coordinators, especially this week, are going to have to prepare for that. But also just the personnel going up against them in this matchup. DeAndre Hopkins, when he does have one-on-ones, it'll probably be primarily against Bashaud Breeland, ranked 125th in Pro Football Focus. And Will Fuller is just going to attract so much more coverage, not in double coverage, but just normal coverage with safeties in the middle of the field and not shadowing Hopkins, because there's no way you could just put a guy like Charvarius Ward on Will Fuller. He's going to toast him left and right, just like last week. So I do think Hopkins at that price point is better. And I think you're going to see a little bit of alleviated double teams this week, because Fuller finally hit big last week, and it's going to ease some of those double teams over the top. So yeah, the ownership that's coming in on Hopkins, I'm fine with it. And I'm probably going to end up having more than it. Maybe not by miles, but I can see like 10% more than that.
Hopkins is very talented. We know. I mean, one of the best wideouts in the game. The one thing that does concern me, Sal, and I mean, maybe you can throw some emphasis on this, is that week one, he got 2 red zone targets. The rest, these last 4 games, he's had 0, Sal. And, that concerns me, because first off, I'm trying to figure out, why are they not getting to him in the red zone? The guy has one of the best hands in the NFL. And I mean, the other thing too, is that his targets, they're just there around 8, but I mean, there's no really long ball plays. And so, obviously, as we know in DFS, especially maybe for people on FanDuel where PPR doesn't essentially matter. I mean, your guy has to score, Sal, in FanDuel. DraftKings is a totally different ball game, because you have the bonus and then you also have the PPR. But on FanDuel, we need to rely on someone to get in the end zone, and we need to rely on someone to really just be able to produce at a high level. And so I want to ask you, with these red zone targets not necessarily going his way, is this any cause of concern?
No, I don't think it is yet. I think it's just like a factor of the entire team right now. So Watson only has 16 total red zone targets. They're scoring a lot, as you saw week 1 with Hopkins, but then also last week with Fuller, just a lot from outside the red zone. So you have 3 tight ends right now for just like Darren Fells in the red zone. A couple for Will Fuller has 4. So it's pretty much distributed because it's just a small sample. So I think just over the course of the year, you'll see them have more red zone attempts. Right now, they just seem to be relying on a lot of big plays, and that's where they're getting a lot of their touchdowns through the air so far. So I think it's definitely due to regress. One of the better red zone receivers, top 5 in the league right now. So if not top 2 with Devontae Adams. So yeah, I think it's fine. I think the red zone so far is just a product of smaller sample and the way that the games have gone.
He does draw a great matchup with the cornerback position of KC, whether it's Rashad Breeland or Charvarius Ward. I think either one of those guys, if they're on him, he's in a great spot. And if there's any moments where he's in the slot, maybe and Kendall Fuller's on him, I think it's great because Kendall Fuller right now, currently, he's given up 2 touchdowns. Every time a pass goes his way, I mean, the quarterback has a passer rating of 151.4. So, no matter what, I think it's definitely a great matchup from this week. And if they're playing from behind, I think I like it. But once again, would love to see some more red zone targets. Let's, like you said, he's one of the top red zone wide receivers in the league. So feed him the ball. And I think that'll allow me to have more confidence as far as rostering him, especially when it's up against the field of 26%. Next guy, Le'Veon Bell. We talked about this pre-show, 25%, 6,400. Going up against Dallas. Sam Darnold's back. It definitely changes the significance of Le'Veon Bell kind of reaching his full potential as far as, on a game-to-game basis. Let's break this down. Le'Veon Bell, is this worth it? And also, give us your insight on why you think Le'Veon Bell is actually a really good play.
Yeah, the ownership's definitely worth it. If I had to guess, he'll probably be maybe some value will open up more, but my highest owned running back, and definitely above that 25%. So, I mean, he comes into the slate with the most opportunities per game, 25.75. You mentioned he gets Darnold back. So not only does that help him, it just helps the entire offense. It doesn't make me like Darnold and the receivers that much more, but more so Bell the most. It's just going to keep drives alive. He only has 2 red zone rushing attempts this year because Luke Falk in this offense just isn't moving the ball, stalled drives. So a guy who has that much opportunity and now is actually going to add in a higher chance of having touchdowns, a higher chance of seeing more touches because of sustained drives. I like it. And not only that, Dallas has struggled against just versatile running backs, especially pass catching running backs. Aaron Jones last week, Alvin Kamara had a quote unquote bad game with 90 total yards against them. And then week 1, Saquon on limited touches goes for 140 yards. The 3 versatile pass catching or backs that can catch the ball that have faced them have all done well to very, very good. And now Le'Veon Bell is going to come in as a top tier workhorse back. So yeah, and that's not even to mention the prices. If Luke Falk is starting this game, probably $1,000 too cheap on a slate where I think running back is pretty thin overall. So yeah, Bell, out of all these top 5 guys in terms of ownership that we're going to talk about, I think he's the one that makes the most sense. And if anything, he's probably too low owned in my opinion. The ownership is coming up, but I think since the last update, it actually went down like 3%. So it seems like it's not going to be anything in the 30s, which is good.
So Dallas defense, up until last week with Aaron Jones, pretty solid. Majority of their touchdowns. So they've given up 5 total touchdowns to running backs this season. 4 of those went to Aaron Jones last week. So it's kind of like an anomaly. And the reason why I'm saying that is because when it comes to the running back position for Dallas, where they suffer is the pass catching backs. And as we know, Le'Veon Bell is one of the best pass catching backs in the league. And they're surrendering right now about 10 targets per game. And they're giving up about 60 yards per game, which is top 5 as far as for, wanting to have a running back against them. So essentially where they struggle the most is those pass catching backs. And I think having Darnold back is going to allow to at least for them to move the ball like we discussed. And it'll allow them to at least, when they move the chains, it allows more touches. Let's just be honest. So whether he's running or whatever the case may be, but I think where he's going to thrive and what people are really focused on and why he's so high owned on DraftKings is because he already gets the targets. He already gets the receptions. And I think that's going to really be the difference maker as far as where he's producing. And if he's able to get into the end zone with that as well, I mean, it's a win-win situation. So, his price point and kind of how he's utilized as a running back, it just doesn't make sense. And that's why you got to take advantage of it. So I don't blame the field. I think it's okay to go that route. And I think they're going to be playing from behind as well. So I think you'll see a lot of dump offs. I think you'll see a lot of screens, a lot of check downs. And I think that's the guy that's going to get him is Le'Veon Bell. Our last guy that's going to round out these top 5 guys that are owned on DK is Malcolm Brown, 4,300. Obviously, this has changed significantly. He was nowhere to be found in ownership over the last couple of days. And this kind of changes a lot of things, Sal. Changes things from a cash perspective, and it also changes things from a GBP perspective because it gives you salary relief. And as you know, salary relief, if we go cheap somewhere, we're paying up somewhere else. So let me ask you this. If you're going Malcolm Brown, to help everyone out here in chat, where do you see people utilizing that extra money in salary relief as far as where are they paying up for in other positions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me personally, I would probably be ending up paying up just to get up to wide receivers because there's just more of them. So I would think naturally you'll get up to more of those wide receivers, the Julio, the Hopkins, Michael Thomas would probably know Jalen Ramsey. That's where I can see it going because at the top end running back, yeah, we have Dalvin Cook in a bad matchup. We have right now an injured Kamara, which will keep people off of him. And then it's just Zeke. So I think there's just more opportunities to get to wide receiver for lineup construction wise. Or the other side of it is you just see a lot more combos of Malcolm Brown plus Ezekiel Elliott. Right now, Elliott's ownership's not coming up. People just down on him in general. We'll talk about that later. But I think for the most part, wide receivers. And for the ownership that it's at right now, like I hinted at earlier, I'm just a little bit less interested in Malcolm Brown. For cash games, it's fine. If he gets me 11, 12 points at that price point, I completely take it. In tournaments, I probably don't like that. But the ownership that it's coming in at right around 20% or so, I think that's fine. What I want to see is come Sunday tomorrow when people have more time to digest this, is it shoot up to 35% or something? Because then that's where I start to take a stand and just stay around 15, 20% and be under it. But as of right now, I like where the ownership's at. I probably match the field 22, 23%. It's not terrible for the price point at all.
What's interesting is, obviously he's one of the highest owned projected players on DraftKings. When you go to FanDuel, I mean, he's the 8th highest projected running back, and he's at 4,800 on FanDuel, 17.6%. And so kind of what I'm seeing here is I think people are going to run 2 powerhouse running backs and maybe Malcolm Brown as well to run that 3 running back type of stack. However, though, is this a situation maybe on FanDuel because of the pricing we could avoid because of how cheap wide receivers are? Because in my mindset, I feel like I don't want to pay up at wide receiver this week. I don't feel like I need to. I feel like there's a lot of great value and there's a lot of great players that are priced appropriately based on point per dollar purposes and matchups. And so Malcolm Brown, based on projections for me, doesn't necessarily match other running backs that I want to roster, nor does it, kind of match any other wide receiver as well. And I don't see myself paying up for wide receivers. So in a difference as far as site, is Malcolm Brown more valuable on DraftKings compared to FanDuel?
That's a good question. Honestly, so yeah, the pricing is going to make him a little bit probably more attractive for me on DraftKings, just relative to the other players that are in play there. But yeah, you mentioned it earlier, just like you're going to be more touchdown dependent on FanDuel anyways, just because of the pricing for bonuses and PPR format of DraftKings. But yeah, I would probably want, if I really have conviction around getting to Brown and you can fit him in your lineups on FanDuel, I'd probably want Brown more there only because he is going to be touchdown dependent. Like he's going to need a touchdown to really bolster you up, if not 2, to win a GPP. So that's probably my stance on it. But I think you make a really good point is it really, for the most part, probably doesn't come down to just getting Brown in your lineup because there's other wide receivers similar to his price point or a little bit more expensive. That's a difference of a defense in getting to him that we think we have a lot of confidence in and probably more confidence in Brown.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at these running backs who are cheap, so who are priced so cheaply, you got to ask yourself, okay, well, if I have, let's say, Fournette and let's just say Tyler Lockett, and that's equivalent to paying for Malcolm Brown and DeAndre Hopkins. Well, you got to ask yourself, does this put me in a better position with Hopkins and Brown, or does it put me in a better position to keep and maintain Fournette and Lockett? And, it's once again, it's all about roster construction. It's all about, okay, well, figuring out why you're, going to go ahead and roster Brown. What is the benefit of rostering Brown for you in that specific lineup? And does it provide more upside knowing that you're going with more of a chalky play now? And does that take away from you maybe, differentiating yourself, nor does it also change your projection? So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. Don't just plug and play. Have reasoning behind why you're going to go ahead and play that player. So that way you can continue to learn and build upon this process week in and week out. Yeah. On FanDuel, it's kind of the same as far as the top 5 guys. The only thing that stands out for me here is Ezekiel Elliott. He's third at 8,500 on FanDuel, 23.7%. And before we go into the games, the breakdown of each game, Ezekiel Elliott, 8,500, 23.7, hasn't done Zeke-like things to justify his price on FanDuel yet. And I want to ask you, as someone who, obviously, has rostered Zeke, is this a spot where it's time to attack? Or, don't forget, the Jets, not a great pass defense. However, rushing with the front four, they kind of can stuff the run. So is it worth it to pay up for Zeke here?
Yeah, so I actually have a lot more. I have a lot of interest in Zeke even on DraftKings. So I'm going to say yes. I know the ownership is there on it, but I like this spot for Zeke. Like, he hasn't done the ceiling type things that we're used to, but in a lot of these situations, it's not his fault. Last week, his team's down 2 to 4 scores. He still puts on 14 touches for 90 yards and a touchdown, which is very effective. He gets pulled week 1. He gets pulled week 2 because they get ahead. Seems like that's not going to happen anymore, though. So I like it. The matchup you said is a little bit tough, but this week right now you have CJ Mosley trending like he's out. And then the big one for the Jets defensive line, doubtful AC joint sprain last week, Henry Anderson. So those are two guys in the Jets defensive line out of their top 5, I would say, run blockers that are likely going to be out for this game, which just helps Zeke as a favorite. So I was expecting a lot higher ownership, similar to what you're seeing on FanDuel on DraftKings for Zeke. So it seems like lineup construction is just going differently. I'm definitely going to be over the field on Zeke on DraftKings. I don't play that much on FanDuel, but if I was there, that ownership that he's coming in at, I would feel comfortable being at or around that ownership, whether it's above or below it. I think it's fine. I like this spot, and I think it's a good spot that Zeke has not been outside of the Saints game, and he still picks up 6 catches, gets in the end zone, so fantasy purposes fine. Zeke has not been abysmal. He's just not had the normal 25 opportunities because of the way that game flows have gone, and him also just being pulled the first 2 games of the year early.
Okay. You guys, once again, if you don't have the ownership projections, if you're not using Fantasy Cruncher, you're not getting these premium articles, don't forget the code is NFL Strategy. Get 50% off your first month with Awesemo. That's AWESEMO.com. All right, Sal, game by game, we're going to break it down, give the people what they want. And let's make sure if there's any questions we see in there, let's go ahead and ask them, guys. Also, while you guys are in here, show us some love. Give us that thumbs up, subscribe. Make sure you are notified when we're going live because there's shows every day throughout the day. It's constant. It's like a secondary version of ESPN. So keep it going and make sure you're subscribing, you're liking, because that helps us provide more content to you guys. All right, first game, Sal. Seahawks at Browns. Seahawks -1.5. Favorites on the road into Cleveland. Over under 46. How do we feel about this game, Sal? Is Baker Mayfield, is this a bounce back game, or is this Browns offense just not what we anticipated?
Man, so yeah, I'm not getting to too much of the Baker Mayfield, but I do think like this whole Browns offense is like a sneaky lower owned stack because I think Seattle's secondary, outside of maybe Griffin, who's played well this year, has been really bad. In Seattle, if you look at the quarterbacks that they played this year and just the offenses in general, a lot of backups, a lot of Teddy Bridgewater, Mason Rudolph type players, Kyler Murray, guys that aren't that solidified in the passing game yet. So I do think this is a good bounce back spot for this offense. There's just a lot of other places on this slate that are more favorable to go to. So in terms of like a Millie Maker type lineup construction, yeah, I think the Browns are kind of sneaky there. Odell's price is clearly too cheap here. That said, he'll probably have Griffin on him for most of that game, I would imagine. Griffin top 15 in coverage, but he's starting to have this squeaky wheel narrative with Odell right now, where even Jarvis Landry's coming out and saying his coach needs to scheme the ball more for Odell Beckham Jr. So the price point's too cheap. I'm going to have interest in Odell, and I'll probably match the field on that. Jarvis Landry has been well. He's been doing really well so far, but at his price point, I like other wide receivers, some that we talked about before the show and some that I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. And then just Nick Chubb is in a weird pricing point. Like, I don't want to pay that much for Nick Chubb. It's hard to get there. If I look up a little bit in price, you get to the top tier running backs. If you go down a little bit where there's a lot of options, at least that we feel comfortable about, the Leonard Fournettes, the Le'Veon Bells, I just rather go there against Nick Chubb. And I am a believer, although early last week, Todd Gurley looked good. Second half, they kind of settled in on the ground. This front for Seattle is pretty, I would say, one of the better front sevens in the league on the ground talent wise. Small sample size so far puts them as a top 5 run defense according to Pro Football Focus, and I think they're every bit of it with guys like Wagner, KJ Wright up there. So yeah, for me, it's gonna get a little bit of Odell Beckham, but if you're talking Millie Maker type stacks, I think the Browns are very sneaky if we're gonna have probably no ownership in a good matchup.
I mean, I would love to roster Odell here. I just don't trust Mayfield.
Yeah.
I mean, to be quite honest with you, he's been so inaccurate. And I mean, I watched that game against the 49ers, and I mean, he looked like a lost puppy. Really just not being able to scramble. I mean, that front four of the 49ers was just getting to him nonstop. He just looked very uncomfortable. Just wasn't throwing accurately whatsoever. And to be quite honest with you, I mean, when you're uncomfortable, you're not in the zone, you can't see the field right. And if he's not seeing the field, he's obviously not going to see Odell Beckham and whatever type of routes he's running or whatever the case may be. But I mean, I think another thing to point out is, I mean, 2 catches, 6 catches, 6 catches his last, 4 games. Granted, let's not count the Jets because he went off with the 6 catches. But outside of that, I mean, he scored 1 touchdown all year. I mean, I don't know what Mayfield's doing. I mean, you have a premium wide out here. You have a great running back too that can open up this passing game. Though the play action calling has been horrible for them. They don't play action on the right type of situations. It just doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. Establish the run, get some great ground game going, and then air it out. I mean, I don't see much of deep threats going to Beckham. It's just really unfortunate because there's a lot of talent there. But once again, I can't roster a wideout if his quarterback's struggling because I need the quarterback to be able to produce in order to give my man the rock. So it's really a sticky situation. Odell Beckham's kind of highly owned too this week. So I'd rather get him in this spot where I'm not comfortable and him being low sub 5% owned. But currently right now, DraftKings, he's 16% projected on Osmo.com.
Yeah. Like Odell at his ownership right now, I think I'm okay with it just because of the price point. But you said it, like, he hasn't been good because of this offense, the way they're scheming. Like, if you take away his 90-yard touchdown against the Jets on that zone, that he took the slant to the house, signature move of his. But outside of that, he hasn't really done much this year, not because of him, just because of the scheme he's in. So it's just a matter of he's still just the talent that you're getting for this matchup, and on a per touch basis, what he's able to do. I do like him this week because of the price point, but it's not something that you prioritize. And if I'm playing 3 maxes, I'm probably going to have him in around, if I set up like 5 3 max lineups to go through those, probably in 1 out of those 5. So a 20% for me, somewhere around there.
On the other side of the ball, he's the 3rd highest owned projected wideout on FanDuel, and that's Tyler Lockett. I would love for you to kind of break down, is this an optimal play? Because I want to talk about the cornerbacks for the Browns. Not necessarily that good. TJ Carey, Terrence Mitchell. I mean, we can even talk about Denzel Ward if you want. I think, we've seen them struggle, especially if you want to talk about the Rams, how Cooper Kupp kind of ate them alive from the slot. And if we could kind of see Lockett do the same thing. Is Lockett, is his ownership justifiable as far as, is this a good play this week? Because I'm still trying to comprehend and digest if Lockett is someone I need to be looking at more than what I originally anticipated in my analysis.
Yeah, so on DraftKings, I think he's a fantastic play. FanDuel, you said the ownership was a little bit higher. So I paused a little bit over there just because of where his skill set is coming out of the slot, and you're going to get more PPR value. Already has an 11-catch game this season. But yeah, overall, just in the context of both or the slate in general, I do like Lockett here. You mentioned the cornerback play has been weak, and they've had a lot of secondary guys in there in terms of backups with Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward trending towards playing, but they also have a bye coming up. So I can see them just saying on Sunday, you know what, let's just sit you guys out one more week and get healthier. So either way, though, Lockett will avoid those guys being in the slot. There's a couple of 6K wide receivers specific to DraftKings that I do like, and I like probably a little bit more, but Lockett's projecting out really nicely right now. And I would say he's too cheap. And he's one of those players that when it comes down to it, I'd rather just play Lockett than reach for a running back in the top upper 5 or low 6K range that I don't feel as confident about this week.
Though the one thing that only concerns me is, weeks 2 and 3, he had 26 combined targets across 2 games. The last 2 games he's had 8 combined targets, 4 and 4 respectively against Arizona, which I thought was a great matchup for him, and then obviously against the Rams. However, though, it's weird because the scheme has kind of changed from what we saw the first few weeks as far as so much volume. And, he had 3 red zone targets in one game against the Saints alone. I want to ask you, has anything changed that you know of as far as the passing game or the strategy or approach the last few weeks in the offense?
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago against Arizona, I think it was just the way the game flowed. And that was my biggest concern with that week was when Seattle's a favorite, they're going to run the ball so much. And that's what happened in that second half. You just saw the passing game and Russell Wilson only throw 28 times. So I think the 4 targets that week were a little justifiable. You'd like to see 5 or 6 when Russell Wilson throws only 28 times, maybe even more. But I think that was just game flow. Last week, it was surprising. You saw him catch maybe one of the better touchdown catches of the year so far, but only gets 4 targets in that game. I'm not too sure exactly why he doesn't see more volume in that game. But I will say Will Dissly is definitely being schemed in more. Will Dissly is having design screens, not only design screens, but out wide designs plays for him. in the middle of the field, he's becoming more of a priority for Russell Wilson. It's still Lockett as the number one guy, but Disley's already becoming like the quick number two option in the passing game. So I would say that that's definitely the scheme is changing. There's design plays for Will Disley. And then really just 2 weeks ago against Arizona, I think it was more of a game flow thing as to why you saw lower volume, but definitely good points and things to think about. At the other spot for this game, and it's giving me a concern, but I don't know how much just due to the other options, is Chris Carson. I mean, DraftKings price of 6,000 is too cheap for a guy who just saw a season high in snaps. And now Rashad Penny has a real chance of missing, re-injured his hamstring in their last practice. But the only concern for Carson is he has two offensive linemen out for this game. DJ Fluker is going to miss this game. And then you also have Dwayne Brown's going to miss this game, a left tackle and a right guard. So they're down two offensive linemen. They're already down another one from this year they put on IR. So it's becoming a concern with just in terms of what pressure you're going to see. Both of those guys weren't great run blockers, but the guys filling in for them are abysmal run blockers. So he's too cheap of a price point. He's going to have a lot of opportunity, but just a matter of, do I think Chris Carson has any work on the ground or room on the ground to go? And that's my biggest problem right now is seeing how much Chris Carson I want to get to. And I guess just baselining what you think on that spot.
I mean, to be quite honest with you, I've been looking at it all week, and I mean, I like it. He's a volume guy too, and the thing is he gets red zone rushes. He's got 16 through 5 games. He's rushed 16 times in the red zone. It's something that's got to give you confidence. He gets targets. He's involved in the passing game. He's scored 2 receiving touchdowns this year already too. I mean, if you look at the last 2 weeks, the level of volume, 22 attempts, 27 attempts, both 100-yard games. I think in this matchup, what we have to take note of is what we just saw in the Browns defense on Monday Night Football against 2 running backs that absolutely destroyed them, ran all over them. And the thing is Russell Wilson's better than Garoppolo, okay? And I think that from the wide receiver core, I think Metcalf and Lockett are better than Goodwin, Pettis, any of their wideouts that they had, okay? I also think that they're better blockers, run blockers as well. And so here's the thing. I think that this could be a smash spot for Carson. And I want to pull up real quick to see kind of what we see on ownership as far as Carson. And he's at 12.4% right now. So, getting a little bit of love. But you got to take note of what we've seen in this weak front four for the Browns. I mean, they looked lost on Monday night in all aspects of the defense, and they got completely ran over on. So, and Chris Carson, I feel like, is somewhat talented to be able to be in this position too. And knowing that they're 1.5-point favorites on the road makes me like him even more. So I don't think there's anything wrong with Chris Carson. I think if anything, you got to look into it a little bit more. But Chris Carson is someone who does get volume. He's someone that you can trust, and he's someone that is used when in the red zone. And I think that they will have quite a few red zone trips this upcoming weekend. So I like Chris Carson, man. I think that's a great call. Our next game, we're going to go into the Texans and Chiefs. I've seen nothing but freaking Pringle in the chat. It's kind of bothering me, okay, because I'm not necessarily on Pringle as all these other guys are that are just talking about how he's a lock. Texans at Chiefs, KC 4-point favorites, over under 55. Talk about Pringle. Break this down for me. Give me an understanding what I'm not seeing. And then also, let's talk about the rest of this matchup because there's a lot of great plays here.
Yeah, so I'll start with those Kansas City wide receivers. And so, look, if Tyreek Hill's in, I don't have any interest in Pringle. And it seems like Tyreek Hill's going to be in. So what we know so far is that it seems like Demarcus Robinson has been the backup of Tyreek Hill just based on how many snaps he's playing and where he's playing on the field. But we have yet to see the Chiefs without any Sammy Watkins, which right now Sammy Watkins ruled doubtful. So it seems like he'll be out. So the question is, does Demarcus Robinson continue his role as the backup to now just Sammy Watkins, who's been in the slot for the majority of his snaps? Or do you just see Pringle take on more of that responsibility and is Pringle the backup to Watkins? I pretty much lean that it's going to be Tyreek Hill on one side. It's going to be Demarcus Robinson on the other side. And then in the slot, you'll have some sort of split between Hardman, who's been playing around 50 to 60% of his snaps in the slot the last couple of weeks. And then especially last week when you saw Watkins go down, and then Pringle, who saw about 40% of his snaps from the slot. So, I don't think there's much upside in Pringle unless Tyreek Hill sits. It's going to be Hill and Robinson if I had to guess on the outsides. Pringle probably fluctuates into the outside behind Robinson and then fluctuates into the slot with Hardman a little bit. But even at that cheap price point, he's only in play for me if Tyreek Hill ends up being ruled out.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, and I'm sorry, I say to be honest sometimes a lot. It's kind of like my little safe word, I guess, when it comes to me talking sometimes. But yeah, I mean, Pringle, he had a great game last week. I'm not going to discredit that. However, though, I'm not going to say just because last week he had a great game and he's low priced that this is necessarily a lock. I got to have someone that I know is going to get touches, that's going to be involved in the offense heavily. And I mean, it's looking like both these wideouts and Watkins and Hill are going to play, more so Hill. And I mean, as soon as they are locked in, it takes away any value whatsoever from Pringle. And so, I mean, yeah, we have to be understanding that just because someone had a great game last week and they were low priced doesn't mean that they're going to replicate that the next week, okay? If you saw that touchdown pass, the way that Mahomes kind of maneuvered his way out of it and drew all the time in the world, then throws it up, and then Pringle comes in and dives forward to go ahead and get the ball. I mean, yeah, it turned out to be a great play. That doesn't mean that Pringle is a lock. And so I understand what people are saying. I understand that they're getting value out of him, but I don't think that this is the right spot to get value. Why not pay up a little bit more than to get Malcolm Brown at the running back position, where you know that you're going to see a ton of plays on the field for him? At least it's more of a security blanket rather than Pringle. Hopkins, we talked about earlier. You know, this might be the time where we see him finally get into the end zone again, get more involved in the offense. We talked about the corners of Kansas City. But Sal, what I want to talk about that people really aren't focused on is I want to talk about the running game on both sides. Both interesting spots. Houston struggles with running backs that can catch the ball, that are involved heavily in the passing game. They give up a ton of targets and receptions per game to running backs. And then on the other side, you have a KCD that's kind of vulnerable to the running game, and we got Hyde here for the Texans that's getting love in this offense. So can we go the running back route? Could we see more of the running game involved in this game?
Man, I wish that starting on the Houston side for running backs, I wish they had just one secure guy. If I knew Hyde was going to get 80% of the snaps, I would actually like him this week, because right now what you're seeing is Chris Jones was just ruled out, defensive lineman for Kansas City. They placed this past week Xavier Williams, another defensive lineman, on IR. So they're down two of their better front seven players, two of the better run stoppers, and even pass rushers with Chris Jones all in the front. So it's going to be soft in terms of better time for DeAndre Hopkins or Deshaun Watson to throw the ball. And then on the ground, yeah, it's going to be a softer matchup for Carlos Hyde. It's going to be a softer matchup for Duke Johnson when he's in there. The game flow, at least from what it's saying, is it'll be somewhat of a neutral game script, maybe play from behind a little bit for Houston, which seems to favor Duke Johnson, but nothing crazy. Like, I still think you see around a 60-40 split in Hyde's favor, which does give him upside in this matchup. It's just tough for me to want to get there. We talked about Malcolm Brown being in that same spot. These guys are guys that I probably consider more so as cashier type plays at like a lower tier cash option. I just wish that this was a spot, because it's so good of a spot against Kansas City's bottom two run defense with two of their better defensive linemen, or maybe their two best defensive linemen, out for this game. But just the way that the snaps are going to be split, I think you can probably find better. And then although I do think Duke Johnson is like a milli maker option is interesting if they get down big here, which is always a possibility against the Chiefs. And then on the KC side, yeah, LaShawn McCoy, after fumbling, he just didn't even play that much. He played like 20% of the snaps last week. It does make Damian Williams interesting. He's been very inefficient. And the Chiefs just lost another offensive lineman last week in Andrew Wiley. He was a left guard. So that's a little bit concerning. And again, it's just a spot where out of this game, I probably like Damian Williams the most at running back, just because I feel the most secure about his overall touches and snaps. But it's probably not a high or really any exposure for me in the backfield here.
Hyde, 8% owned on DraftKings, projected 6% on FanDuel. And one thing to keep in mind, Kansas City Chiefs surrendering the second most rushing yards per game, 148 rushing yards per game to the running back position, and over 30 fantasy points per game to running backs as well. So I think Hyde is interesting. I do like a lot of other running backs before Hyde, but I think from a GDP perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with sprinkling some of them in. I think you made a great point. Two key defensive people will be out for the Chiefs. Makes the Chiefs' run defense even more vulnerable. So this could be a situation, too, where they want to control the clock. They want to control the ball. Being on the road, it's going to be a hostile environment over at Arrowhead. So, yeah, I mean, I could definitely see Hyde being used heavily in this offense to kind of just keep that pace and to keep the game close and to move the chains. So, yeah, Hyde, definitely there. Ownership seems to be sub 10% on both sides. Nothing wrong with that. Next game, I don't know if we're going to have much to say, Sal. This might be our fastest take. Redskins at Dolphins, over under 42, 4-point favorites for Washington. Do we have any interest?
So I'll start on the Redskins side real quick. People had some interest in like Adrian Peterson and cash because the new interim head coach with Jay Gruden gone saying that they want to run the ball a lot more. And maybe you do get Adrian Peterson seeing 18 touches. But I have no interest there because Wes Martin, their right guard, was just ruled out. Donald Penn is dealing with an injury and is questionable for this game. They're not sure if he suits up. And with all that running back value we've already talked about, I'm just not going to get to old man Adrian Peterson. Even if you told me he had 20 matchups in or 20 carries for sure in a beneficial matchup, I'm not even sure the skill set is still there. So no real interest in Peterson. I actually do like Terry McLaurin as a very deep sort of not even a dart throw, but just a lower owned play. Xavier Howard has not been great this year, but a lot of that skewed from one game against Amari Cooper. Most of his production was given up. Xavier Howard battling an injury. And I don't know, you might get a shadow matchup with Xavier Howard, but it's not the worst thing in the world for Terry McLaurin. So McLaurin from Washington, the only thing that I'll have like very little exposure to in something like a larger field Millie Maker. And then for Miami, it's just Preston Williams right now. I really like this matchup. And not only the matchup, but the price point on him. Kenyon Drake becomes interesting if Kalen Ballage is out, but Kenyon Drake's playing less than 60% of the snaps this year. Ballage hasn't been that used in the offense at all, really, anyway. So even if he's out, it's not a huge bump. It'll just be a snaps bump. This Washington defense on the ground and in the air has been terrible. So, yeah, like you said, there's not much takes here. It's Preston Williams for lower-owned wide receiver. It's Kenyon Drake as one of the guys that I actually like the most if Ballage ends up being out of those lower-end running backs for a larger field GPP. And then Terry McLaurin as sort of a lower owns high upside player, especially with Case Keenum going to be back this week. They've shown a rapport through their first 3 to 4 games.
If someone here is in chat or whoever is listening and you're fixated on Adrian Peterson, you need to stop because there's no upside regardless if the coach says that they're going to run a little bit more. Let's break this down real quick. His last 3 games, 12 attempts, 11 attempts, 7 attempts. Didn't hit 4 fantasy points in any of those games. He's averaging literally 2.7 yards per attempt, not involved in the passing game whatsoever. The one game that he had 3 targets, 1 reception for -3 yards. There's no upside here, in my opinion, with Peterson. And at that point, you have a Malcolm Brown that you could pivot to if you're looking to pay cheap at running back. You have a potential Edmonds from Arizona. Be smart. Don't give your money away because at the end of the day, you're just wasting time. I think if there's someone you want to consider from the running back position, I think would be interesting is Kenyon Drake seems to be getting quite a bit of love to an extent this week. I don't necessarily know if this is the right approach, but at the end of the day, anything can happen. I need to see a little bit more from the volume. It's very sporadic. He's only seen over 10 carries twice. Don't really trust it that much. He does get targets, though, catches about 3-4 passes a game. Outside of that, though, Kenyon Drake, Chris Thompson, you can consider him, but I don't see anything. One thing I do see is a lot of ownerships going to the Washington defense. They have had a turnover in each of the last 4 games. They do get a few sacks. Now they're going to be going up against a team that is just completely one of the worst teams in NFL history. Can we consider paying for the Washington defense here? Is this a defense that we can roster?
Yeah, it's definitely rosterable. They'll be able, for a team that doesn't generate that much pressure against Miami, they'll definitely be able to generate pressure. This is crazy, but I think that Miami actually has more skill in terms of like skilled players and talent on their team. So it's not a spot that I'm like looking or going out of my way to roster like most weeks you usually do against Miami, because just based on the Washington secondary and the skill that they have there compared to the skill in Miami's offense, which is a lot, definitely below average. But when you factor in Kenyon Drake and maybe an expanded role, Preston Williams, Devontae Parker, it's not a spot that I'm prioritizing. And I usually don't prioritize paying up for defense in the past weeks, but just prioritizing as people were in previous weeks when they're playing the Patriots and the Cowboys and defenses like that.
Yeah, there's no way I'm paying for Preston Williams when I have my man D.D. Westbrook that I think is in just such a great spot, who is priced less than Preston Williams. Have no idea why, but we'll talk about my man D.D. when we get into it here shortly. Our next game is a game that I'm really still confused on, Sal. I really want you to kind of just break it down a little bit more, but it's Eagles at Vikings, Minnesota 3-point favorites, over under 44. A lot of love going to Dalvin Cook. But let me tell you, Sal, I wrote this in the tweet yesterday, establishing the run with Dalvin Cook, it might be a little bit tougher than compared in recent weeks because the Eagles have one of the best rush defenses in the NFL. They're only surrendering 3.2 yards per carry. But the biggest thing that really caught me was that they stuffed 32% of opponents' run cells at or behind the line of scrimmage. And if this is the case, when you're doing something like that on the defense, you're making longer downs. So second and long and third and long, which turns into essentially passing downs. And so in order for them to be able to really be more effective, they're not going to they shouldn't be relying too much on the run in early downs, because that's going to really hurt them, I believe, if this is the case. So I want to ask you, Dalvin Cook, are you buying or are you just neutral? Where are you at with Dalvin Cook?
Now, I'm going to take a pretty strong stance and come in very much under the field. Look, Dalvin Cook, I was probably leaning to go a little bit more neutral and still be probably even a little under. But they ruled out Josh Klein, who's one of their better offensive linemen. So that definitely doesn't help when you're going up in a matchup like this to lose one of your better run blocking linemen. Just a brutal matchup. The opportunities are there. Red zone rushing attempts. We know everything that's there for him, but it's a game script that says more passing attempts, probably closer to 35, which is crazy, but 10 above his average for Kirk Cousins. I'm going to take a pretty strong stance and probably come in very much below the field on Dalvin Cook, especially because just my opinions on Zeke. I like Zeke a good amount this week. And when they're that close in price, when I get up there, I'll just get up to Zeke. The final kind of thing that broke the camel's back for me was probably just seeing Josh Klein get ruled out on the offensive line. You have to be as stout as you can on that line play when you're going to go up against the Eagles defensive front. So yeah, for me, it's going to be coming in under the field. I was actually surprised to see, at least originally, coming in on 20% on Dalvin Cook, more than double what they're getting on Zeke right now in ownership. So definitely surprising.
Another area that we should talk about is the Eagles' pass defense is not what it seems on the rush defense. A lot of struggles here in the secondary, and specifically their safety and Ronald Darby, their corner, who usually is matched up with either the number one or number two wide receiver, has been getting torched this year. And Thielen or Diggs becomes very interesting. And I think specifically Diggs. I think this is Diggs' week to break out. I think we saw them step up last week. There was a lot of turmoil. There was a lot of negative energy beyond the passing game and the offense, and it was really kind of affecting the culture of the team. Well, what did we see? We saw Cousins come out, started seeing him throwing, started seeing him going ahead and attacking more, being more aggressive. And what did that lead to? A game for Thielen going off, right? Jets secondary, as we know, weak, young, very inexperienced. They exploited that. We have another matchup this week where the passing defense favors the Vikings passing offense. And I mean, to be honest with you, I think what I like here is I like the Vikings offense as far as passing way more than the rushing game.
Yeah, I agree. I prefer the passing game of the Vikings. I probably get just one-offs of Diggs and Thielen the most, but I definitely don't think it's a bad spot to stack. It's just there's probably 4 or 5 other spots I like a little bit more here. But yeah, Thielen's getting 50% of the air yards on this team. Diggs, the concern is like he's only getting 4 targets per game, 4.5 targets per game. But I do agree with you that his price point has gotten to a point of 5,900 that we know the upside that's there. He has like a league leading 5 catches called back this year. So you're getting a built-in price discount in terms of just, it looks like he's doing a lot less than he actually is. He's very active on the field. And he's losing about a target per game so far due to penalty, if not more. So yeah, I do like both of those guys. I'm going to have pieces in one-offs of both. And I'm very surprised, especially due to the matchup, to see how low they're owned right now.
I mean, it's huge. I mean, you have 2 guys that have a lot of upside, that are explosive, that can provide you big play opportunities. For me, Stephon Diggs is really showing up in my model as one of the best plays this week. I mean, he's 5,800 on FanDuel, Sal. And when you look at him on DraftKings, he's 5,900. So he's affordably priced, and he's not being looked at. And I think people are really scared to really attack this passing offense of the Vikings, because it hasn't been there all season really. But once again, this is what happens when they face weak passing defenses. They have a dual threat situation. So if they're not able to establish the running game, well, guess what? We're going to go ahead and throw it. But no matter what, people are game planning the Vikings to attack and load the box and attack the run. And I think that's going to help the Vikings offense significantly when it comes to the passing game. Next game, Saints-Jaguars, Sal. Saints going on the road into Jacksonville. Jacksonville, 3-point favorites at home, 42.5 over under. We talked a lot about Fournette earlier. A lot of weapons in this matchup, Sal. You know, and I think we both were on the same guy this week. D.D. Westbrook. Let's go, Sal. D.D. Westbrook is the play this week. Am I right?
Yeah, D.D.'s in a really good spot. It's funny. I did a tweet, and then Chris, we were both having like the exact same mindset. And he wrote on it. You write in all my plays. It's funny, but no, yeah. Chris was on it as well. So you get PJ Williams in the slot against DD. PJ Williams, it's not just people like anchoring because PJ Williams was bad one week. He's been bad just so much this year, dating back to last year. Average points against PJ Williams so far this year in terms of that primary matchup. The players that face him in the slot are finishing the game on average with a little bit above 22 fantasy points per game. I expect to see Marshawn Lattimore actually shadow DJ Chark. He's only done 3 out of 5 shadows in terms of the weeks so far this year. Hopkins, Amari Cooper, and Mike Evans. He shut down Evans and Amari Cooper. Lattimore is not that bad of a cornerback. Like, his stats seem very bad, but it was skewed by a week 1 matchup where Hopkins lit him up. Hopkins has speed and size. That's what Chark has. So I imagine you see a shadow there. So it's a difficult matchup for Chark, which just helps out DD even more. And then you take into account James O'Shaughnessy, tight end, who was actually seeing targets 4 per game, had a little bit of a connection in the middle of the field with Minshew. He's going to be gone. He's on IR. Their backup tight ends, or the third string tight ends, out. So middle of the field is going to be patrolled by DD Westbrook, who's getting separation the past few weeks, getting targets, and now has a really good matchup. So the favorite play in this game as a whole is going to be DD Westbrook. But I saw people earlier just spamming the chat a little bit with Minshew's name. Yeah, I think it's a good spot. I think he's cheap enough. He has a realistic floor due to his rushing upside. And the secondary here is the way that you want to attack the Saints, I'll say, rather than the defensive line. So I do like, similar to how I like small doses of Minnesota stacks, I like small doses of Jacksonville stacks in terms of DD and Chark. It's just Chark's matchup is a little bit tougher than those probably expect. But yeah, this is a nice spot. There's loads of weapons, like you said, and kind of under the radar weapons, really. But DD Westbrook's probably my favorite play in this game. He's one of the head scratchers for me when I see his price point, his matchup, and then his ownership is just not there.
Yeah, I'm really confused right now because, I mean, all right, first let's break down his prices. He's $5,100 on DraftKings. He's $5,400 on FanDuel, $16 on Yahoo. And we were both on the same page yesterday as far as what we've seen in this New Orleans passing defense, that, you know, they've surrendered the most points, fantasy points per game, 2 slot wideouts this season. And you made a great point, PJ Williams. He struggled significantly this year for the Saints covering the slot. And if we see Lattimore on Chark, and we see PJ in the slot against DD Westbrook, I mean, let's look at what, you know, wide receivers have done this year. Chris Godwin, 7 for 152, 2 touchdowns. Lockett, 11, 154, touchdown. Cooper Kupp, 5, 120, a touchdown. I mean, even Kenny Stills, not much playing time, 337, a touchdown. And so DD Westbrook, you know, getting targets, heavily involved in this passing game. He runs 85.8% of his routes in the slot. I mean, almost the entire game. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities here to take advantage of a weak area in the Saints defense, but it's the price point. I mean, you mean to tell me that Preston Williams costs more than DD Westbrook? It makes no sense. And so, you know, people are just overlooking this and not thinking that it's a great matchup, but in reality it is. And, you know, I think a lot of focus is going to be on Fournette. And I think that that's going to help boost significantly the passing game. Gardner Minshew can throw the ball. You know, he's very elusive in the pocket as well. So I think he's going to put himself in a position to try to win this game. I mean, they're favorites. They're going to throw the ball. They're not just run dependent. So I feel like it's a great matchup for both these wideouts, and I'm really curious to see kind of what we see tomorrow morning as far as final ownership. But I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I think DD Westbrook's in a smash spot. He's definitely cash game valuable as well. And to be honest with you, I think GBP being at his ownership, it's going to be great. So yeah, someone asked FanDuel price, and he's $5,400 on FanDuel, guys. DD Westbrook is $5,100 on DraftKings, and he's nowhere to be found in ownership. He's sub 4%. Outside of that, quarterbacks, Bridgewater went off last week. Sal, Gardner Minshew went off last week, and I want to talk about DraftKings specifically. I don't think they're very valuable on FanDuel, but Gardner Minshew's 5,000. Could we pair him with these wideouts of Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think you can. Not in probably any heavy doses for me, but I'll have shares of it. I do like DD that much. And I think Minshew, you saw sort of a ceiling game last week from him, or damn near a ceiling game, but I think his floor is high enough that he's in play. But like, don't get carried away with some of those stacks. It's something that you sprinkle into your exposures compared to some of these really good game environments. Some we've touched on, some we haven't yet.
Yeah, I agree. And guys, for everyone in here, don't forget, let's get those thumbs up. Let's keep liking. Let's keep this train going, because we're going to go into our next game. And I know a lot of people have questions about this. I know a lot of people are interested because I got my big play in this game. But you guys, keep it going. Give us a thumbs up. Subscribe. You know the deal. We're producing content every day. We want to make sure we're there to cover anything you guys need. And make sure you guys continue to ask questions in the chat so we can go ahead and continue to help you guys. Sal, the next game, Bengals at Ravens, 11-point favorites for the Ravens, 48 over under for this game. I have a great few plays in here, Sal. Go ahead and break this down.
Yeah, so Bengals at Ravens. On the Bengals side of it, they lose another offensive lineman. Andre Smith, left tackle, is going to miss this game with an ankle injury, so that doesn't help an offensive line that is already bad. They're big underdogs in this game, so I don't really have any interest in Joe Mixon. Offensive line also a concern there. But Tyler Boyd, I think, is in a fantastic spot out of the slot. What you get out of Tyler Boyd is a beneficial matchup against Baltimore, very beneficial matchup. We talk about how bad P.J. Williams is in the slot. Well, Baltimore's just playing musical chairs in their slot since Tavon Young's been out all year, and he will be out all year. Lots of success in the slot against Baltimore so far this season. Juju goes for 75 yards, a touchdown. Landry, a career day, over 160 yards. 2 100-yard wide receivers out of the slot for the Cardinals week 1. So Tyler Boyd is probably my favorite play on the Bengals, and then not much else interest there. Tyler Eifert is losing all of his upside, which is red zone play, because Auden Tate is there now. Auden Tate's probably going to have to face some Marlon Humphrey on the outside. So it's really just Tyler Boyd on the Bengals side. But the Baltimore side's interesting. Hollywood Brown's going to be a game time decision and trending towards not playing. So that's worrisome for just the overall upside in the Baltimore offense. Lamar Jackson, he's going to always have upside if you want to play him in cash tournaments by himself. He has that upside due to his rushing ability, second in fantasy points per touch. But these are the spots that get interesting. Mark Andrews, he's leaving a ton of air yards on the field. He's likely to play in this game. I do like the price point as another option to pivot away from some of the he's going to be highly owned as well, but some of the chalk that's coming in on George Kittle a little bit. But here's the guy. In the beginning of the week, I had really no interest in Mark Ingram, but as guys are dropping, Todd Gurley, as guys' offensive linemen are dropping, like Chris Carson, my interest in Mark Ingram is coming up a little bit. Now, we know we don't have the passing game role there, but what is good is his matchup now. You're going to have no Dunlap on the outside. You're going to have no Glasgow on the outs or on the defensive line. Those are two players on the defensive line that aren't going to be there for already a bad Bengals run defense. He's very much touchdown dependent just due to the fact that he has no passing game work. But now that running back is becoming thinner and thinner, my interest in Mark Ingram from a no in terms of the sheets that I have was listed as a no. He's now listed as a yes just because the player pool for running back is so small, and the matchup is getting harder to ignore with these guys just going down with injury.
I mean, I think Mark Ingram is one of the best running back choices this week. I wrote him up in my article yesterday. And for you guys that haven't checked out my article, go check it out. It's my likes and dislikes, essentially a locks and fade article for the week. It's free. It's up on osmo.com. You can check out my Twitter too and check that out. But listen, Cincinnati Bengals surrendering the most fantasy points per game to the running back position, over 41 points per game. And that number is more than double almost half of the NFL, worse than all of football. And I've talked about it. Baltimore's strength is Cincinnati's weakness, the running game. I mean, let's just be honest with you. The Ravens come into this game, number 2 rushing offense in the league. Ingram, he gets 15 carries per game, right? It's great. He's also involved in the passing game. But where I think this is big is he's had 16 red zone rushes through 5 games. Every time they get into the red zone, he gets the rock. I love that. And at his price point, $6,600 on DraftKings, $7,500 on FanDuel, $27 on Yahoo. I mean, this essentially is a great situation for him because I think a lot of things are going to happen. I think the defense is going to get some turnovers in the opponent's in Cincinnati's field or red zone, essentially. I see the defense making plays. I see them having short field drives. But the biggest thing is people are worried about, is it going to be a blowout? Let's go back to week 1. I mean, Mark Ingram was still in the game when they were up 30 points. And that was a huge blowout. So what I think here, what we'll see is, I think we're going to see a lot of ground and pound. We're going to see a lot of relying on the running game, especially if Hollywood Brown is out. I think you're going to see even Ingram touch the ball even more. So I think you made a great point. I think Mark Ingram, as the days go by, especially with who's going to be out on defense for the Bengals, this is a great situation for him. And what's even crazy is that he's low owned. I don't get it. Can you help me fathom why he's so low owned?
Yeah, so the ownership is definitely lower than it should be, but it's just a passing game work. Like Fournette's averaging 7 fantasy points a game in the passing game. Le'Veon Bell's above that, and they're in the same price range. So like I do prefer those running backs. But then after that, with Chris Carson, I have serious concerns with this offensive line. So it's making me have some more interest in Mark Ingram. And then obviously Todd Gurley not going to play. Didn't have a ton of interest, but was going to have small exposure. So like I much prefer Le'Veon Bell in that price range. I probably still give the edge to Leonard Fournette in that price range. But yeah, I agree. Mark Ingram as a huge favorite, and now these injuries to the defense. I think the biggest spots where people in DFS just don't pay attention to, and people being just like the majority of the public, is offensive line injuries and defensive line injuries and how that impacts the running game. There's two guys in the defensive line out for this game, and they're already 12-point favorites, and they're going to be without Hollywood Brown, which probably makes them rely heavier on the run with no deep threat targets on the field, or more than likely going to be out without Hollywood Brown the way that it's trending. So yeah, Mark Ingram, my interest is coming up. I honestly did not have much interest to start the week, and right now he's somebody who is in a player pool of like 6 or 7 yeses for me at running back.
Our next game. Oh, by the way, let's talk about Tyler Boyd real quick.
Yeah.
If this is a narrative too, where I mean, obviously he's getting targets. The guy is heavily involved in the passing game. Is Tyler Boyd somewhat? I mean, he's projected to be highly owned. Are you okay with rostering Tyler Boyd?
Yeah, I'm totally okay with it. I like the price point that he's at. Similar to Lockett, I actually prefer Tyler Boyd a little bit more than Lockett, but similar to Lockett, I'm getting to more Tyler Boyds and Lockett's in my flex spots, or just 4 wide receivers instead of running backs than some of these lower end running backs in the 5 and 6K range. So really like Boyd, really like the way it sets up, especially when you think about game flow. If they are down 10 in this game, similar to last week when they were down, the Tyler Boyd show kind of took over in the second half when it was just a pass first script.
All right. Next game. We're going in now to the later games. We got 4 of them, Sal. 49ers at Rams. 50.5 over under. Rams are favored by 3 points, Sal. We talked a lot about Malcolm Brown. Obviously, Todd Gurley's out. Where are you going with this game as far as other weapons, and where do you see this game going? Do you think it's going to be a shootout like this over under suggests?
Honestly, I think this is one of the games. I think the over-under is a little bit high. Now, I know it's later in the week, so the line's pretty locked in terms of trying to lock a bet in, but maybe not too late. Yeah, I think it's a little bit high, but yeah, George Kittle is the guy I like from San Francisco. That's about it. Now, with all this running back opening up or value opening up, it doesn't really give me any interest in going to Tevin Coleman, who we saw is probably underpriced based on the role that he had on that last game. But yeah, George Kittle dealing with the injury a little bit. We talked about him earlier if people want to go back and look at that, but I think he's a fine play. We were both right there. You said that you like Cooper a little bit more. I slightly like Kittle, but it's like 1A, 1B for me. And then on the Rams side, yeah, Brandon Cook seems like he's going to play. So what that does for me is it makes Gerald Everett not as good of a play in my opinion. But yeah, you're not going to have Gurley out there. So we talked about Malcolm Brown and the interest there. I think it's fine at current ownership, but monitor that. If it comes up to something extreme, I'm probably going to be underweight. Cooper Kupp, it's a good matchup. Kwan Williams has taken over the slot the last 2 weeks, it seems, for the 49ers, and he's actually playing better. But Cooper Kupp's just dominated every matchup, leading the slate in targets, 12.6 per game. It's pretty much for me, Kittle, and then on the Rams side, Kupp. It's a high total, but I don't have all that much interest. This secondary and this defensive line, this defense and team in general for the 49ers has just been so well coached on both sides of the ball, performing really well. Richard Sherman's on the field 95% of the time on one side of the field. 95% of the time, Mosley's on the other side of the field, and they're just not giving up anything. Sherman's allowing, on average, only 3 catches for 30 yards a game. Mosley, only 20 yards per game right now. So I don't really have much interest, although he's underpriced, in my opinion, on DraftKings. In Cooks, you're just not getting much upside if he has to face Sherman. Sherman stays on one side of the field, so if they just say, okay, let's put Cooks or Woods on the other side of the field for a better matchup, you have Mosley's, who's only giving up like 20 yards a game right now. So it's a spot where I like Kupp. It's a spot where I like Kittle. I know Woods is underpriced, but I'd rather get to guys like Dede that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest here. When it comes to this game, this over-under total, I think it's a little bit high. I think we're going to see a defensive matchup here. I think, and what I mean by that is I think the Rams defense shows up. I think we'll see some of the normal performers from the wideouts and from the passing offense from the Rams. But I don't see 49ers going into LA really holding it down. I really don't. I feel like this is a trap to a certain extent. Kittle, I could see if they're playing from behind, especially if they're needed to rely on the passing game more. I mean, Kittle's always a top tight end, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm okay with Kittle in all formats. But yeah, I feel very indifferent about this game. Something just doesn't rub me the right way. So I don't really know how, especially with Gurley out, will they run the ball heavy? I just don't think they do. I think that they just continue to pass, and Jared Goff is a completely different guy at home than compared to on the road. So yeah, I'm rolling with the Rams passing offense here. I don't really see too much love for myself on the 49ers side in this game. Falcons at Cardinals, Atlanta 2.5-point favorites, over under 51.5. Wow. A lot of ownership here for David Johnson, for Larry Fitzgerald, for Julio Jones, for even Deontay Freeman. Are you rolling with the field here?
No, not really, honestly. So I know the game environment is very good. So starting one on the Atlanta side of it, I really like Matt Ryan. The problem with it's not really even a problem. It's maybe a good problem for Atlanta, but for DFS people, it could be a headache. Is there's so many options to pair Matt Ryan with Hooper, Julio Jones, Ridley, Sanu. Like usually you like to find two secure pass catchers and you're feeling good about a stack. Whereas Sanu this week against Tremaine Brock in the slot has the best individual matchup, but we know Sanu doesn't have that much of a ceiling on him. We know Calvin Ridley's going to have a good matchup against Kevin Peterson on the outside. And then Julio, I think Julio still sees double teams, which is concerning, but they're going to be weak double teams with Byron Murphy covering him. So I do think Julio's a good play, but I prefer this week in order DeAndre Hopkins, then Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas not having to face, it seems like, no Jalen Ramsey out there. Both of those guys I'd rather pay up for. It's really, for me on the Atlanta side, I really like Matt Ryan. I don't understand why his price point is still where it is. It should be honestly higher. It came up a little bit, but it should just be higher based on what he's been doing this season. 44 pass attempts per game. Arizona's giving up the third most fantasy points. I like Matt Ryan. I like pairing him primarily with Austin Hooper and then kind of rotating the other players through there. Julio Jones, obviously. So the main stack that I would probably get to is Ryan, Hooper, and Julio Jones. On the Atlanta side of it, I don't really have much interest in Freeman. I know people are getting here. I personally think he's a bit overpriced at 5,800. Honestly, he's still seeing like a 60-40 split with Ito. The offensive line is depleted in terms of injuries. Some of their guys they drafted in the first round already gone for the year, but that's hurting the running game a lot more than the passing game so far. So don't really have much interest in Freeman at that price tag. It's mainly Ryan and Hooper, and then I'm always going to have a certain exposure to Julio Jones each week. Arizona side of it, yeah, Kyler Murray's situation gets better and better. Desmond Trufant, who's already been terrible this year, but he's going to be out now. So just think about how his replacement will do if he's been on the field as much as he has been and performing so poorly. So Kyler Murray, I really like. We've yet to see the ceiling combination game of both the passing game getting going with the running game. The closest we saw was last week, and he had a very good game. So with Christian Kirk coming back, it's like the obvious pairing is Kirk and Fitzgerald. I think both are fine. I prefer Fitzgerald if you're picking one for cash, Kirk for GPPs. And then, yeah, we talked about it at the top of the show. This David Johnson situation, it seems like he's going to play a reduced role based on his interview on Friday. And if that's the case, it's the worst case scenario. It means that him and Chase Edmonds probably split the workload, and we don't know how that goes. It can go either way. If David Johnson's feeling good, he gets more than he's letting on right now. Or if he's injured, then it could be a Chase Edmonds game. Or it could just end up that they both have an average workload of about 12 touches and neither are needed. So right now I've pulled back a lot of my David Johnson ownership. And I'm kind of just waiting on news. And I'm kind of fearful that both of their upsides in this matchup could be just kind of cannibalized by each other if they both play 50% of the snaps or so.
Falcons and Cardinals, both in the top three as far as giving up the most fantasy points to the quarterback position. And then Falcons and Cardinals, both second in the league with giving up 12 touchdowns each, respectively, passing touchdowns as well. I think Kyler Murray here is very interesting. I think this is a game where we could finally see more than what he's already doing. I mean, he's barely doing much, but he's still getting there because of his rushing ability, because of that dual threat capability. But one guy that I'm very, very keen on is Christian Kirk. 5,200 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel, 1,600 on Yahoo. I wrote this guy up too. Last week we saw Will Fuller completely destroy that Falcons secondary. And the Falcons struggle not only with quarterbacks, but the wide receiver 2 position. They're the worst in the NFL. They give up about 24 fantasy points per game, Sal. And Kirk's limited right now as far as his injury status, but he's projected to play. And I'll say this, he's going to draw a great matchup with Isaiah Oliver. This corner, I talked about it yesterday. He's given up 20 receptions, 300 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and a passer rating of 120.6 when thrown his way. Kirk's on the field, and a lot of people are going to Larry Fitzgerald. There's no doubt in my mind that what we've seen so far as the volume, 37 targets, I think it's hard to ignore Kirk at that price point, given the type of volume that he gets and the matchup that he has. And he's very low percentage as far as where he's supposed to be owned right now. So I really like Christian Kirk here, Sal, and I think this is a game for the Cardinals passing offense to thrive.
Yeah, I agree. And if I had to play, just like right now with the news that we have, I think the best skilled position player for Arizona that I would go to if he's healthy is Christian Kirk, not counting the quarterback Murray in that. I do prefer Kirk over Fitzgerald and all the other wide receivers. And yeah, right now I feel like my hands are tied with the running back position in terms of if the news stays as is with David Johnson saying that he's going to have a reduced role and it kind of goes to a 50-50 split or so, then it just, for me, makes both players just, for me, I don't want to get any of them really at 50% snaps for each of them. Johnson's price is too much. Edmonds' upside goes away. So yeah, I agree. Right now where I'm sitting with the news that we have, I like Christian Kirk the most from the Cardinals side.
Last two games, Sal. Titans, Broncos, 40.5 over under. Denver, 1.5 point favorites. I was on the show yesterday with Manny. He kind of got shocked because I like two players from this game, Sal. I'm very big on my man Derrick Henry this week.
Uh-oh.
Am I crazy?
Okay, so let's go with this then. The running back tier right now is thin, like we've been kind of hinting at for the show. So a guy who's going to see on average 25 touches or so, or opportunities in what you're going to get from Derrick Henry is always good. But my thing with Derrick Henry in this matchup is not so much him, it's the defense that he's facing. And I think it's a little bit overinflated into how much people think that this defense is terrible. And let me just pull up the notes that I have on Tennessee. So what you get from Tennessee or Denver's defense is a spot that they gave up 225 yards to Leonard Fournette. For sure, terrible game, terrible performance. Other than that, though, they've been pretty locked down, on average only giving up close to 3 yards per carry. They held Josh Jacobs to under 4. They held David Montgomery to under 3.5 yards per carry. They held last week Eckler and Gordon to 2.5 yards per carry. And the week that they gave up a ton of production to Fournette, they didn't have one of their better run stoppers, and not even the best, but Derek Wolfe was out. But it was more so who they put in there. They put in Draymond Jones, who's one of the worst tackling defensive linemen in the entire league, according to Pro Football Focus. If you have a grade in like the 40s or 50s, you're really bad. His grade was 23 for tackling. Like that's like not even should be in the NFL starting in a game bad. So he was who was in there trying to tackle Leonard Fournette in the middle of that line. And then they lost Bradley Chubb that game. So they were down two guys in their front seven, two of their better players. So where that leaves me is just in the price range that it is. I much prefer getting to Le'Veon Bell in a lot of my lineups. And right now I don't have interest in Derrick Henry, but it's probably more so just my bias against guys who don't catch the ball as much. And I do think this matchup is tougher than it leads on. That said, though, if you're talking volume over efficiency, you probably do more times than not in this matchup get 20 to 22 carries out of Derrick Henry, the guy who's probably going to see 300 to 350 carries at the end of the year.
So, I mean, volume definitely plays a role, Sal. I think another thing is, not necessarily the yards per carry. I think when they're in the red zone, they struggle to tackle. Both the corners and the linebackers have, I mean, the overall, their tackling as a team has been completely horrible this year. Just to break some numbers down, Josh Jacobs, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns, okay? Both coming in the red zone. Then we have David Montgomery, 62 yards, 1 touchdown, came in the red zone. And then we go into the Packers game. Aaron Jones, not much on the ground game, but 2 touchdowns, both in the red zone. And then we have Fournette, who didn't get in the red zone, but had 225 yards. And so, obviously, as we know, Derrick Henry, he gets his touches in the red zone, right? I believe I wrote up, I think he has 13 or 14 this year. But, he scored a touchdown every game the last 4 games. For me, if they move the ball, and which I don't know if they're going to be able to do as much in the passing game because Broncos passing D is pretty stout. But I do feel that if they do get some opportunities because of their defense to allow them to have short fields, I could see this as an area where they do struggle against the run. For me, in a workhorse and volume at that price point, I think it's very justifiable. And I think another thing is that he's going to be low owned. A lot of people aren't going to really factor him in this week. I'm not saying he's a cash game play. I think it's more of a GBP play. I think if you're multi-entering, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's okay to spread it out, but we talked about it pregame in this show that there's only a few set of running backs that we have in our player pool, and for me, he's one of them. So I really feel that in this matchup, based on what we've seen throughout the year so far and how Denver has struggled in the red zone against running backs, this could be an optimal spot for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I think we'll probably end up differing on that, but it's not like you're not risking it with a lower price guy who you're hoping to get 12 carries or 15 carries like a Malcolm Brown. Like you feel pretty confident, even if they're down a touchdown, that like worst case is 18 carries in this matchup for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I love Bell. So don't get me wrong. I think Bell is a great play here. And I'm not saying that you don't play Bell because I'm going to have lots of shares of Bell. I think Bell is an excellent matchup, especially with the game strip that we're looking at. But it's also fair to say that don't override other opportunities that might get underlooked because everyone's so fixated on one player. Sometimes it's okay to spread it out a little bit. And I feel like Henry is that option where you could spread it out too. And I think that's what I'm breaking down here.
That's fair.
Last game, Sal, and obviously we're going to it. Le'Veon Bell, Cowboys at Jets to close out this Week 6 main slate. Over under 45. Dallas 7-point favorite on the road going into New York. I wrote up Michael Gallup. I think this is a great spot for him. I think the Jets passing defense is absolutely horrible. Running defense is a little bit of a different situation. We love Le'Veon Bell, as we discussed. Ezekiel Elliott's very interesting. But let's go in a little bit more in depth, Sal. Let's break this game down.
Yeah, so I'll break it down. I'll go on the side of the Jets to start. You get Sam Darnold back. It bumps up the whole offense. And all of these Jets players are priced as if you have Luke Falk still in there. So starting with Le'Veon Bell, I personally think at that price point, he's probably the best running back play on the slate. He leads the slate in opportunities per game, meaning targets and touches, 25.75. He's averaging 8 targets per game. He's a guy who's averaging over 8 fantasy points per game just through his passing game work, primarily with Luke Falk, where you have a lot of stalled drives. Only 2 red zone rushing attempts per game. I imagine that severely and significantly progresses positively for him, and that's going to start with Sam Darnold being back. So you look at Dallas. I mentioned at the top, against versatile and pass-catching running backs, they have been poor. You have Saquon week 1 on limited carries and touches, 14, getting 140 yards. Obviously, last week, Aaron Jones goes nuts, has 180 total yards, 4 touchdowns, versatile back, 7 catches. And then Alvin Kamara was the guy who was, I guess you can say, limited, quote unquote, with 90 total yards against them a few weeks back. So Le'Veon Bell for me is an absolute smash play, especially with Darnold back. You're going to have more sustained drives. The rest of the Jets offense, though, like, look, Crowder had a ton of targets, like 17 week 1. If you want to take a chance on him in cash, you can. I'm just not too convinced yet that Darnold's going to be as sharp and on his A game as possible. Definitely better than Luke Falk, even if he's not all the way up to par. But it leads me mainly to get to Bell. Anderson becomes, at that price point, 4,000, a GPP. I guess you can say dart throw, but I do prefer other options than going there. So primarily for me, it's Bell on the Jets side. And I'm fine stacking this game with Dallas and running it back with Bell because we know the game flow independence that Bell has and the receiving game on the ground. And Dallas, I mean, I like all pieces of this game. Now with Darnold back, it makes me like Dak a little bit more. Not emphasizing him in terms of my overall exposure in quarterbacks, but it makes me get to more Cowboy stacks, which obviously means I get to Dak. So we touched on Michael Gallup. He's going to face Darrell Roberts, who's given up 23 receptions this year for over 220 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's just been getting torched left and right. It's on average, the guys he faces are getting over 17 fantasy points per game. Now you insert Michael Gallup, who's top 5 on the slate in terms of targets per game. Amari Cooper seems to be healthy, officially off the injury report. Really like that spot for Amari Cooper as well. There's just nobody who can guard these guys. These Jets cornerbacks are some of the worst in the league. Tremaine Johnson's going to be on Amari Cooper. That's a really good spot. So once you start liking both these wide receivers, sure, you can get pieces of both of them, but I'm probably also just going to stack the whole game. And then lastly, Zeke Elliott. Yeah, I like him. I like that the ownership's coming in low. Look, people are down on Zeke Elliott, whether it's season long or what he's doing in DFS, but a lot of these are just game flows that he can't control. His coach pulling him from the first 2 games. Last week, his team getting down 2 to 4 touchdowns throughout, and he still puts up 90 yards and a touchdown on limited touches. So now he's a favorite. Now you get a matchup where CJ Mosley's going to be out. Henry Anderson's doubtful, likely to be out. That's 2 guys out of the top 5 run blocking on this Jets defensive line that are out. Yeah, I like this. I'm not going to be stacking Dak with Zeke all that much, if at all. But where I don't get to Cowboy stacks, I'll have a good exposure of Zeke, and I feel fine with it. There's a lot of pieces in this game, and it's the last one on the slate for the people that like that late night, although it's not night, but by the end of it, the late night hammer. Once Darnold came back, it made this game a lot more appealing.
I mean, I think Darnold coming back changes everything, especially for Le'Veon Bell. I think his stock significantly increases because, one, you have a QB1 that's starting, and 2, you have someone that can at least move the chains, who has the potential to move the chains. And I think in this matchup we saw last week against the Cowboys with the Packers, a lot of weaknesses there. And I think the Jets will definitely use that to their advantage. I think, once again, Cowboys struggle with pass catching backs. As we know, Le'Veon Bell is one of the best pass catching backs in the league. It's really hard to override him here, especially at this price point. Michael Gallup, it's like you said, this situation for Michael Gallup, I wrote it up, going against Darrell Roberts. I mean, he's given up 22 catches, 220 yards, 3 touchdowns this year. You're going to see Michael Gallup a ton. Michael Gallup, he's getting 9.3 targets per game. And I think when you look at this Dallas offense, and when you're on the defense, you're worried about Cooper and Zeke before you are Michael Gallup, which I think helps Michael Gallup as well. So in this situation, I think it's like you said, there's a lot of weapons here, a lot of areas you can go, a lot of stacks you can utilize. I love the Cooper and Dak Prescott and Michael Gallup 3-man stack. I ran with some of those late last night. I was playing around with it. So you can't go wrong here. Michael Gallup, 5,600 on DraftKings, 6,100 on FanDuel, $21 on Yahoo. Once again, a lot of great plays here. It's going to be an exciting game to watch. Definitely probably is going to shift or be the deciding factor of that millionaire maker. You guys, that's it for the 10 games. If there's anything you want to ask real quick, please go ahead and do so in chat before we go ahead and close this out. And as you guys are writing in your questions, don't forget, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, because every day we are producing content for you guys. There's live shows every day. Make sure you guys are notified, you're informed so you can watch them live and that you don't miss out on them. Tomorrow's week 6 main slate. We got a question, Sal. Do we know Kamara? Is he in?
We don't know yet. He's questionable, so he'll be just sort of something. And so here's the good thing with Kamara. He plays at 1, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So you'll find that news out around 11:30 tomorrow. I would expect him to play. It doesn't seem like it's a significant ankle injury, something that's just more so precautionary. Ended up on the status of being questionable. So just track it. You'll know by 11:30, which is something that we're not going to know for most of these injuries.
Someone asked Michael Gallup. They have him sub 10% owned. Currently, Gallup is sub 10% owned on both platforms for DraftKings and for FanDuel. How many Cowboys is too much Cowboys in the 4 p.m. only contest, Sal?
I mean, you probably don't want. So this is the thing. More times than not, in far majority of the time, you don't want more than 3. So if you're stacking it, I would get to both of the wide receivers. I guess there's some correlation enough with Zeke, although he's not being as heavily used in the receiving game. And this game sets up more so for the ground game for Zeke than being used as a pass catcher. So I would say 3 and make sure it's sort of like a Dak, Amari, and Michael Gallup stack for correlation. That said, though, it always reminds me of like, I think it was a couple of years back when like a Steelers stack of like 6 Steelers won the Millie Maker, which was just absolutely absurd. So very low percentage chance. So I would say more times than not, I'll be going with 3 players from one side of the game and 4 to 5 total from that game is the highest that I go.
Someone asked, would you play both Parker and Preston Williams in the same lineup?
I mean, if you're going for that GPP Millie Maker, nobody's owning Rosen, Parker, and Preston Williams. Sure, I personally wouldn't. I'm just singling out Preston Williams.
Who should you start, Sal? Curtis Samuel or Mike Williams?
I like Mike Williams there. The guy has so many air yards on the field. He's not on the main slate, of course. This is probably a season-long question, but it's a spot where Mike Williams has just so many air yards left on the field, and I really like the matchup with some injuries to the defensive backs that he'll be facing.
Ezekiel Elliott or Le'Veon Bell?
Give me Le'Veon Bell.
Wentz or Rivers?
Give me Rivers.
Zeke or the Dallas passing game if you had to choose?
So if I had to choose, I would take Zeke.
Okay. For the millionaire maker, someone asked, is it possible to go Chris Thompson or Adrian Peterson?
I wouldn't go either. I mean, it's possible, but I wouldn't go either.
Okay. And then someone asked, why do we like D.D. Westbrook so much when he isn't highly rated on Awesemo?
I'm not sure what goes into those personally. So I would just say I like him because the matchup that you're getting against PJ Williams has just been an open door. And not only that, not only is it an open door matchup, 22 points per game, DD is slowly gaining the trust more and more of Minshew, seeing 11 targets last week. But then there's also other factors. You're going to have DJ Shark with his toughest matchup of the year. People think he was shadowed by James Bradbury last week when he wasn't. He only faced him on 3 of his targets. He caught all of them, which is good for Shark, but now gets Lattimore his toughest matchup of the year. And then you have James O'Shaughnessy, a tight end who was used decently. Minshew looked his way 4 times per game, now out on IR. So there's just so much more to go around for DD, and I imagine he's the primary focus of the passing game, especially when Minshew's offensive line has the worst matchup as opposed to offensive line versus defensive line this week. It's for Jacksonville against New Orleans. So if you're going to be under pressure, you look towards your running backs, Leonard Fournette, a little bit of a bump, and then you look towards the slot for short passes. So that's why I personally like him, and I'm going to be getting there. And then also the price point's really beneficial.
All right. And then the last one, if you are playing 2 receivers on the same team, pick a good team. I like Diggs and Thielens and Cousins stack. Is that okay?
Yeah, that stack's fine. And those are the guys that you would get to. They're in a very beneficial matchup. What you need there is exactly what we've and people are predicting. Dalvin Cook gets shut down. Josh Klein being out would help that happening. So, yeah, I think it's a fine stack, and those receivers are cheap enough to where they can pay it off and have upside.
And finally, sorry, our last one, they wrote the question 5 times, so we got to go ahead and pay our respects. Thoughts on Jakeem Grant against Washington?
No real interest there. So Jakeem Grant and Albert Wilson, both slot receivers for Miami, are due to come back this week. I think they kind of cannibalize. Well, I can't even say that word right now. Cannibalize each other there. And And Albert Wilson will be the guy ahead of him in the pecking order. So no real interest there.
All right. Well, you guys, it's been a pleasure. Kind of went a little bit over. I mean, an hour and 45 minutes today, but it's okay. We took our time. We hope that we gave you guys some clarity on week 6 for tomorrow for the main slate. It was a pleasure with you, Sal, once again. Sal, let everyone know where we can find you and how we can continue watching your content on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I'll be here on Awesemo on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays at 11 a.m. You can find me on Twitter at SalVetryDFS. And then I have a YouTube channel, just my name, Sal Vetri, that also gets the audio gets stripped into a podcast format if that's easier for you. And then that's about it for me. I guess the last thing I'll say is I got a text that notified me during this that my grandparents are watching this. So shout out to my grandparents there at the end of this.
Wow. Shout out to the grandparents, Mrs. Sal, Mr. Sal.
There you go.
Wow. The Vitri grandparents tuning in. I love it. You guys, for me, Chris Randone, you go ahead and check out my Twitter. Check out my articles on Awesemo.com. I'm on the shows throughout the week, getting ready for basketball season as well. Getting really excited to go ahead and start working in that mix. But you guys, once again, have a great weekend. Make great decisions. Play good players. Don't overthink it. And you guys, at the end of the day, when the clock strikes 1 o'clock tomorrow, good luck. If we don't take down the Millie, we hope you do. Until next time, guys, Sal Vitri, Chris Randone, Awesemo.com. We're out. Have a great weekend, everyone.